Welcome to High Cheese. It's Friday, June 14th, 2024. So, Hunter Biden was convicted this week of lying on a gun application. And quite frankly, I'm a little surprised about this. But there's a couple of things that come out of this that are telling for me. The first thing is that apparently Joe Biden's tentacles don't go far and wide in Delaware anymore. And you can understand that. I think the people are a little wise in Delaware. They see Joe Biden under an impeachment inquiry. We see him falling in the polls. We see his brother James, big political player in Delaware. He's right smack in the middle of this entire inquiry into Joe Biden. So the people of Delaware say, well, wait a second, I'm not hanging my hat with these guys. And it made it a little bit easier to convict Hunter Biden. Now, the second item is that you see the mainstream media trying to twist this into some kind of new narrative. They're out there saying, oh, listen, see, this is fair justice. Donald Trump gets convicted. They can go after Hunter Biden. But here's not what they're not going to tell you. This is where they're disingenuous. The only reason we had this trial in Delaware is because the DOJ got caught trying to give Hunter Biden a sweetheart plea deal. This was several months ago. So we would never have gone to trial here, but the DOJ got caught. They got boxed into a corner. Remember when the judge looked at this original plea deal that was going to allow Hunter to essentially walk, give him essentially some type of blanket immunity for future items? And the judge said, wait a second, what is this? And this blew the lid off of everything that the DOJ was trying to do. So they essentially were forced into this trial. And the mainstream media saying, see, look, they can go after Hunter Biden. The only reason they went after Hunter Biden because they had to. If it was up to them, they would have pushed this plea deal through. And Hunter Biden would have been walking free today on this gun charge. Now, Hunter's got another trial pending in California over IRS issues. And we'll see what happens with this. But Joe Biden says he's not going to commute Hunter's sentence. Now, we don't know what the sentence is yet. We don't know what the judge is going to do, if he's going to give him probation or put him into jail. Now, I've seen statistics that said that over 90% of convictions for these type of gun crimes result in jail. But we don't know. And we don't know what the date is of this sentencing. But Joe Biden's out there saying, oh, I'm not going to commute my son's sentence. And we know that's not true. We know that Joe Biden, after the election, is going to pardon or commute Hunter Biden for everything. We know that. If he actually lasts that long. And when Joe Biden says, no, I don't plan on doing it, he's lying. So we shall see. Now, I want to take us out into the international stage. And the European Union had their elections this past week. And the populist conservatives made massive inroads into these elections, particularly in France and in Germany. Now, what the EU is, it's an economic bloc in Europe where essentially all the countries of Europe have given up their national sovereignty into this European Union. And the people of Europe, particularly in France and Germany, have had enough, particularly with immigration, their economy. And it was just massive inroads that the populist conservatives have made in these countries. Now, as a result, President Macron of France has ordered a new election in France. High risk. You don't know what's going to happen. He doesn't know what's going to happen. But it's a panic move by Macron. He has seen what the populists are doing in his own country. And quite frankly, he doesn't know if he can govern anymore. That's why he's calling for the election. We had the globalist president of Germany take it on the chin with these elections. But my point I'm trying to make is that what's going on in America is not in a vacuum. The populist conservative movement is a worldwide trend. And this is telling for what's going to happen in November here in the United States with Donald Trump. Now, you've had this election here in the European Union. About a year ago, you had the populist Milei being elected president of Argentina. And history has a tendency to repeat itself. Now, if you can remember, in 2016, you had England voting to take themselves out of the European Union. And this was quite telling in 2016 for the election of Trump. And I have a feeling this is foretelling of what's going to happen here in the United States in November. So it's going to be really interesting what happens with the elections in France. And I'll keep you updated on this. And we shall see. And immigration was a big issue in the European Union elections. And it's a big issue here. And with that said, I want to take us to a clip. It's with Margaret Brennan from Face the Nation. And she's going over a poll with one of CBS's own pollsters. And what came out of this poll is that over 60% of the American people side with Donald Trump's position to have mass deportations of illegal immigrants here. So let's go to this clip, and then we'll come back and discuss.
You've seen the Trump campaign talking about mass deportations. We tested that in a general way in principle. Would you support a new government program that would deport all people living in the U.S. illegally? And that finds majority favor. That finds 6 and 10. It's strongest among folks who are MAGA. It's strongest among Trump supporters, but also from some Democrats as well. And I think that speaks to the general idea, not just that people see the border as a crisis, but also where we are in the campaign, where a lot of very dramatic or new proposals out there are finding favor here.
And then Brennan comes back and tries to give the globalists cover on this. Well, Donald Trump's policies, and it may not be legal. We don't know if local law enforcement can get involved here, and we don't want to go back to caging children, that kind of stuff. And then she finishes up with, well, do they really know what they're talking about? Do the American people really know what they're saying here? Oh, like Margaret Brennan knows. And that's what they want you to think. You can't think different than us. We're the ones that set the table, not the American people. So let's go back to Brennan, and then we'll come back and discuss.
So unpack that a bit, because this 62% of Americans favor deporting all undocumented immigrants. What do people think they're supporting?
What do they think they're supporting? They're supporting the mass deportation of illegal immigrants that are affecting dramatically this country, economically, socially, from a safety standpoint. But she knows better. She knows more than the pollsters, what she wants you to think, what she's trying to undermine what the pollster is saying. But the pollster comes back and kind of sums everything up.
But look, it does tell you, though, for the viewer watching this campaign, that what we're seeing here connects to whether it's the courts, what some people say is the politicization of the courts, these ideas of mass deportations, etc. We are in a different era in which a lot of folks say the system as a whole is not working.
And he's right about that. People don't want Biden's open border, and Trump wants to do something about it. So we shall see. And another piece of policy that the American people continue to sour on is the Ukraine war. There's no end game in sight. All we're doing is increasing the probability that we have a third world war, possibly a nuclear war, and there's no end game in sight. At first they came out and said, we got to protect democracy. Well, Ukraine isn't really much of a democracy. We've got a dictator here. We've got Zelensky who banned elections. He's banned opposition parties. He's got Nazis fighting for him, the Azov battalion. And when that didn't really work or didn't catch on with the American people, well, it's good for the economy. It's good for our national defense contractors. Let them make billions. Well, that's not really quite working. And one thing about this whole concept about building artillery shells, building tanks, it's good for the economy on the margins, on the short term. But you don't want to base your economy on this because this is short-lived. Because all artillery shells do is either sit in your stockpile or kill people. Is that what you want your economy based on? And there's no real velocity with this type of economy. Take a look at Henry Ford. Henry Ford invested a ton of money into cars. Well, because they had cars, other economic expansion occurred. People could drive, people could create new businesses because people are more mobile. And that doesn't happen with an artillery shell. It just sits there. It sits there or kills. So their economic impact on the American economy didn't quite sit well with many Americans, including myself. So now they're saying, we've got to protect the natural assets of Ukraine. And with that said, I want to go to a clip with Lindsey Graham, the warmonger, Lindsey Graham. He's never met a war that he didn't like, as long as other people fight it. So let's go to this clip, and then we'll come back and discuss.
They're sitting on 10 to 12 trillion dollars of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That 10 to 12 trillion dollars of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China.
So that's the latest story. We need a trading partner. So let's protect Ukraine. Let's get all of those Ukrainians killed. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men have been killed. Their country's been decimated. But it's been good for Zelensky and the oligarchs. But we need a trading partner. And then this whole thing about keeping these assets away from Russia and China. Well, Russia has massive amounts of assets in their own right. I think they're one of the most asset-rich countries in the world. And I'm talking about commodities, oil, minerals, things like that. So Russia really doesn't need Ukrainian assets. They got plenty on their own. If there really are such assets in Ukraine. Graham didn't cite any studies regarding any asset-rich Ukraine. But Lindsey Graham, let's get all these people killed. Let's get into a third world war because we need a trading partner. And you know what's really scary? As the Ukrainian army continues to get ground to nothing, they're going to use these same excuses to put troops on the ground. That's what they're aiming for. These are going to be the same excuses. And when does it end? It's got to end at some point, or there's going to be a disaster. And this is just the realities. So we shall see. And while we're on the topic of Ukraine, the EU and the United States just agreed to steal Russian reserves, Russian dollar reserves, and use them to give money to Ukraine. Now, apparently what they've done is Russia has, like many countries, they have Western assets in various accounts throughout the world, usually in the form of treasuries, something along those lines. And the EU and the United States came in and stole the money and are going to give the interest that these assets that they stole earn to give to Ukraine. And there's two things that are happening here. One is that Russia's going to respond. There are a number of Western assets in Russia that Russia's just going to take in response to this. And the other thing, too, is that this does hinder, in a way, Donald Trump's ability to create peace in Ukraine once he's elected. Because there's now going to be a stream of payments over the next, I think, 10 years going to Ukraine out of this stolen money. So it's going to make it much more difficult for Donald Trump to create peace over there. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to Trump-proof the world so they can continue their wars. And the other consequence of this decision is that it further weakens the U.S. dollar's position as the world's reserve currency. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, but decisions like this slowly chip away at the U.S. dollar's position as the reserve currency. And the reason is because, you've got all these countries that have reserves in dollars or treasuries throughout the world in control of the West, including the United States. And what's going to happen if I'm a country and says, well, wait a second, I've got all these reserves in the U.S. and in the West, and say I do something that they don't like. Are they going to steal my reserves too? So it's going to make these countries think twice about putting so much money in dollar reserves. Now, Saudi Arabia just announced that they are no longer going to sell oil in U.S. dollars. Now, for years, I think it's been 50 years that Saudi Arabia agreed to sell oil based on the U.S. dollar. Well, they're saying no more. They see the liability there. And again, this further chips away at the position of the U.S. dollar being the world's reserve. You've seen the acceleration of BRICS coming out with an alternate currency. So there are repercussions to this decision. And in the big picture, the repercussions outweigh any benefit you get from continuing funding this war. So we shall see. Now, I've often said that the truth always comes out. And with that said, I want to play a clip with Nancy Pelosi. And it was during the day of J6. And Nancy takes responsibility for not having the National Guard at Capitol Hill set up before the riots. Now, during the J6 hearing, you hear all this obfuscation about who was responsible for security at Capitol Hill. And it was Nancy Pelosi, and she dropped the ball on it. And quite frankly, Donald Trump and his advisors had recommended National Guard before the protest. So let's go to this clip, and then we'll come back and discuss.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient resources.
No, there's not a question of how they had been. They don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
And this will get to the voter, particularly the independent voter. As all this stuff trickles out, Americans are going to say, well, wait a second, Trump was right about all this. He's been under attack for a majority of his tenure as president. And he's fought back. And yeah, Trump was right. And before I go, I just want to read this article from Zero Hedge. And the headline says, trans swimmer Lia Thomas has discrimination case against World Aquatics dismissed. Transgender swimmer Lia Thomas from the University of Pennsylvania has seen his legal case against World Aquatics dismissed by the Court of Arbitration for Sports. His case was focused on trying to overturn World Aquatics' vote that took place in 2022, stopping transgender swimmers who have gone through any stage of the process of male puberty from competing in women's sports. Thomas was trying to argue that the rules were discriminatory, but the court found that Thomas is not allowed to race in competitions through World Aquatics or USA Swimming. World Aquatics said, World Aquatics is dedicated to fostering an environment that promotes fairness, respect, and equal opportunities for athletes of all genders, and we reaffirm this pledge. It called the ruling a major step to protect women's sports. So that's good news. And I hope this expands to decisions made by the NCAA and every other athletic organization. Because allowing men to compete in women's sports is discriminatory, and it prevents women from making themselves better. And with that said, thank you very much for listening. You have a good week, and I will talk to you next Saturday.